Arthas, you can't just... It's done. Those of you who have the will to taste this flan, follow me. The rest of you, get out of my kitchen.
Warcraft Reforged left quite a void in terms of expectations of Blizzard for releasing remasters, which has left a lot of fans very concerned about the possibility of a repeat performance with the recently announced Diablo 2 Resurrected.
It is finished.
In my last video, where I discussed the pros and cons of the Diablo 2 remaster recently announced, this became even more apparent outside of social media chatter. The passion that the community has for Diablo 2 is unmistakable, and thus Blizzard can't afford to screw this one up. So from one Diablo fan to another, seriously, I've been playing since the first game came out in 1997, let's take a minute to examine the failures of Warcraft 3 Reforged and what Blizzard really needs to avoid to make this a successful remaster launch.
Not even death can save you from me.
Graphical Downgrade. One major trope of gaming showcases is the tendency to show off this beautiful, mostly polished piece to wow and amaze the crowd. And then right at release, the first few complaints to roll out across the social sphere pertain to graphics. This is absolutely true of Warcraft 3 Reforged. The original announcement trailer and accompanying teasers were rife with beautiful, updated cinematics and gameplay, only to be washed out by smaller scale cutscenes with chat boxes and graphics that just didn't meet the resolution standards the community was promised. So far, we've seen a beautiful reimagining of the world we've known for 20 years in Sanctuary. The level of detail that's gone into the recreation of the environment down to the smallest little features is absolutely a thrill to bear witness to. Everything has been dialed to 11. If it has to do with ambience in towns, it's extra ambient, with more knickknacks than a hoarder with $1,000 in a thrift shop. If there's blood on the ground in the various dungeons, it's extra bloody. Like, we're talking the difference between a puddle on the ground and the walls of the blood spatter test room in a forensics lab. Even the lighting, for a few complaints about a few abilities, and rightly so, are absolutely gorgeous. Vicarious Visions has done a tremendous job, but they've set the bar pretty high. And while in some cases, like lower in console play, downgrades are expected, but if the bar is dropped to a far noticeable extreme, there will be community backlash. Bugs and differences in gameplay. Warcraft 3 Reforged was absolutely full of bugs, this cannot be argued, and that is such a difficult thing to rationalize on the part of the company. Like, how do you take a game that's been working amazingly for over a decade and create a remaster that absolutely fails to live up to the original? How do you make an improvement that's worse than the original? How do you do that? You should never expect something that is marketed as an improvement on the original product to perform with less efficiency than a game that's been out for 20 years. In fact, if the game has bugs that were never addressed, you should absolutely expect those things to be fixed and everything else to be left alone.
So when you guys are going through and trying to make it as close to the original experience as possible, are you going to take the opportunity to maybe fix some of the long-standing bugs, particularly like the invisible poison clouds of death and like the halls of Vought that were just like, there were engine issues that just never got addressed?
It's a great question. You know, we look at a lot of the bugs and concerns people have had over the past 20 years with the game, and sometimes we look at it as like, should we keep this as is, and sometimes we look at it as like, okay, this is a bug, but sometimes other things we identify as quirks. You know, like some people find ways to play a certain situation against a certain boss, and we're like, well, it might not have been as intended, or like it's something people discovered over the years, many years later, but it's kind of like part of the experience in ways. So we're kind of leaving that as is in ways. So it's a lot of like a story behind each thing and discussions on how we're going to approach each individual bug that's being brought up.
Add little quality of life changes here and there, absolutely. They've announced some truly great features coming, and Dash covered those in another video. You should watch that next. But if you're trying to add or change too much, you run a real risk of endangering the expectancy of quality of the original production. So fix things that are broken, and leave the rest functioning as it will. Vicarious Visions is taking a 70-30 approach to the design of the game. 70% of the game will be kept to its original standing with 30% allowance for a little wiggle room. Not a bad way to go, and some would argue that it should be kept a little bit more true to the original, and some would argue that more liberties should be taken. Whatever side you're on, always keep in mind that the more they change, the greater the risk of losing what made the original such a timeless classic. You know, unless Blizzard wants people to just keep playing the original. Just saying. Online server access. With Blizzard consolidating its online play servers across other games, one can't help but imagine that it may do the same with Diablo 2 Original and Resurrected as well. Now, the devs have stated that the two games will still remain separate online experiences, albeit being able to transfer local saves from Diablo 2 Classic to Resurrected. How this is going to reflect in Battle.net play is unknown, but if Reforged taught us anything, is that if you consolidate the games on the same infrastructure and you can't play one, both are compromised. Diablo 3 ran into a serious problem as well with Error 37. I remember picking up my copy on release night, getting home, running the installer, hearing that nostalgic Tristram theme, albeit the fact that it was actually the new Tristram theme, and then with my blood boiling, ready to slaughter demons, I can't even log into the bloody server. If servers run into errors with Diablo 2 Resurrected and they're connected to Classic, it probably won't be as bad because there's still offline play. Let's be real here. But it still will leave a bitter taste in people who may have wanted to play with their friends at launch. I know everyone at the Game Lord Discord server will be remiss not to be able to hang out with each other at launch. You should come hang out with us. Just saying. That's the plug. Maintain basic features. Same as keeping with gameplay stability, it's also a great practice to keep with all functions of the original. Things like the ability to set hotkeys if you're on PC, which Vicarious Visions has already stated they're keeping as a core pillar of their design, are important to the legacy of the original. Functions like that, among so many others, should be kept. Even leaderboards are still a part of the framework of the game, even to the point of being universal, so players of Classic can compete with players of Resurrected. However, some functions were never added to the game. Things like clans and clan housing were never added to Classic despite having been in design talks. These types of functions and features should be considered as part of that 30%, but again, you need to monitor how these things will ultimately affect the feel of the world as it currently is. If there's one thing the Diablo 2 community has been very vocal about in the last decade, do not play with game feel. Not trashing Diablo 3 here. Someone else might be, but not me. Take your time. Vicarious Visions has announced a release date by end of this year, so hopefully sometime in 2021 we'll get the chance to play this wonderful game. But we still have no announcement date of a technical alpha. It's important to give the community time to test the product, give feedback, and get changes and adjustments made to the current build of the game and move into a beta before release. The last thing you want is to take too much time moving into an alpha, then rush everything to try to make that launch deadline. By all means, and I know I'm going to make someone mad by saying this, but take your time, Vicarious Visions. Do not give us an untested product just to meet a launch date. More games than just Reforged have taught us that releasing an unfinished product is several times worse than just taking a few more months to polish a game. Now, all of this said, I want to reiterate that Vicarious Visions has been discussing from the beginning that they are doing everything they can around the core pillar of keeping with the legacy of the original. And when they do roll out a technical alpha, they're asking for multiple points of analysis, and doing so in 2 stages. They'll have one alpha for offline play and one for online. They're really looking into community feedback. I strongly urge everyone to opt in for the alpha if you haven't done so already. The devs are listening. Let your voices be heard. This is our game. Let's keep it that way. Thanks for watching. And until next time, Traveler.
Then I must consider this an act of seasoning. Seasoning? Have you sauced your mince, Arthas? Have I? Lord Umami, by my right of succession and sovereignty of my crown of roast pork, I hereby rehydrate you from your commandard and suspenderoni your pepperoni from service.